Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm McKenna Jordan. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. And we were just commenting ahead of time. It's been a Monday, so I have rushed home from the store to come here and introduce these authors and get this event going. Any of you who are joining us, we certainly appreciate. I know it's hard on a Monday evening to come and watch a virtual event, but we will have it available on YouTube or Facebook if you want to watch it after the fact, or if you join late, you can definitely check in later. I will mention that we have a busy virtual events week, as they all seem to be now. Tomorrow afternoon, I will be talking with Ellie Griffiths about her new book, The Postscript Murders. She'll be joining us from the UK. Wednesday evening, we'll be hosting J.T. Ellison in conversation with Helen Ellis. And then if you are a historical mystery fan, make sure to tune in on Thursday. We have S.J. Bennett discussing the Windsor Knot at 1. And then Mariah Fredericks and Jess Montgomery talking about their new historical mysteries that evening. And then I will not rattle on much longer, but Saturday night, we have a treat. We do quarterly Murder by the Book Recommends, where we talk about the books that we're recommending, the books that we love that have just recently come out. So that will be our spring edition, and we will all be talking about our books from home over, as you can tell, Facebook and YouTube. So if you haven't seen one of those, they're pretty fun. And it's what we love to do best, talk about books that we enjoy. We're also going to be back in April with another Polis and Agora night, and in May with another Polis and Agora night on a Monday night. So we're really excited to be kind of championing smaller presses and really believe in diverse voices and appreciate what Agora is trying to do here. So we will be hosting those in April and May, and we hope you can join us again for that. Many of you also would be familiar with our Murder by the Box Best of the Month subscription. And our February pick was R.V. Ramon's A Will to Kill, which was also an Agora title. So we love what they're doing, and we hope you enjoy tonight's event. So that's enough out of me. If you have any questions, please put them in the live chat in YouTube or in the comments on Facebook. I'm also going to drop a link here that has information and ordering information for all of the authors' books. If you're so inclined, we do stock them and would love to take care of those orders for you. Okay, so our guest moderator tonight is actually the editor of Agora Books. Her name is Chantel Osman, and I'm going to get her introduced, but here she is. Hi, Chantel.
Hi, thank you so much for hosting us, not just this time, but the next 2 times as well. You'll be sick of us by the end of spring.
I doubt it. I love talking to people about things they're passionate about, so it's going to be great. I'm going to go ahead and get you introduced, and then we'll move on to the other authors. So Chantel Aimee Osman is the editor of Agora, an imprint of Polis Books, which focuses on crime fiction with unique social and cultural themes. Books she has edited have been nominated for multiple Edgar, Anthony, Lefty, Macavity, and Strand Critics Awards. Apologies, I have shortened everyone's bio since we have 4 of us tonight. So, but I am looking forward to your conversation with these authors. Next up, in no particular order, we have Josh Stallings. Hi, Josh.
Hello.
Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having us out.
Absolutely. So Josh Stallings' Moses McGuire trilogy found itself on over 14 Best of the Year lists, and Young Americans, a standalone, was nominated for the Lefty and Anthony Awards. Born in LA and raised by counterculture activists and sometimes Quakers in Northern California, he grew up an undiagnosed dyslexic and spent some time as a petty criminal and failed actor before becoming a movie trailer editor. And he is here tonight to talk with us about his latest release, Tricky, which I failed to have a copy to Vanna White. So maybe someone will have it to hold up, but thanks so much for being here.
Thanks.
All right, so next up is Cynthia Pelayo. Hi, Cynthia.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Oh, of course, it's a pleasure. Okay, so Cynthia is the author of Loteria, Santa Muerte, The Missing, and Poems of My Night, all of which have been nominated for International Latino Book Awards. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism, a Master's of Science in Marketing, a Master of Fine Arts in Writing, and is a doctoral candidate in Business Psychology. and she's here to talk about her new thriller, Children of Chicago. So I can't wait to hear more about that.
Thank you.
And last up, but not least, Vito Racanelli. Hi.
Hello, thank you for having me and us.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. So Vito's short stories have appeared in numerous publications, including the Akashic Books Mondays Are Murder series. His works have also been performed at Liars League, New York City, and broadcast BBC4 as part of its Sunday afternoon story series. His A Trip to the Trees Place was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Vito's nonfiction has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, among other newspapers. He is a Barron's staff writer and is regularly interviewed by U.S. and European TV and radio programs. And he is here. His latest book is Man of Milan. So again, if you want more information about those books, I'm about to put the link in the comments. And for now, I'm going to leave them to it and let Chantel run the show. Y'all have fun.
Thank you so much, McKenna.
Thank you.
All right. So one of the reasons that I gathered the three of you here today was because to me, all three of your books had a very, very strong sense of place. Cynthia's series we're calling the, Chicago saga, because it's basically a character in the book. And the same thing is true for Josh. Los Angeles is very much, key to and central to the story and informs. It's as much a protagonist as the other protagonists, which we'll get into in a little bit. And Vito, yours obviously even has, like Cynthia's does, a city in the title. So The Man from Milan. So, can you talk, all of you, any of you, about why you're so enthusiastic about the locations and what inspired you really to make them a central character in your stories?
I love LA. I was born there. I write about LA. Everything. It's a hard town to write in as a crime writer because you're going up against guys like Raymond Chandler. But my part of LA, I just love. I love Northeast LA. I love a town that has some of the best taco trucks in the world. It's, and the hard part is writing about a town that so many other crime writers have written about. The easy part for me is I was born in that town. I've spent a lot of my life there. And there's a whole lot in it that I personally want to talk about that isn't what we've seen. There's a million kinds of LA. And my LA is there. I have, with every book I've written, put a flag that says my name on my little section of Northeast LA. And that's, there are writers who write about LA and nobody speaks Spanish. I went, well, that's not my LA. That's somebody else's LA. And that's fine. That's their LA. In my LA, we get, we have Mexican bakeries. We have all those things there. We have Russian mobsters. All that stuff is in Northeast LA. It's my little weird corner, but for me, I love it.
And I agree with Josh's sentiment about his little corner of his city. And I think that's why it was important for me to write about my little area in Chicago, because we think of Chicago and we think of the Magnificent Mile and the skyline and Michael Jordan and pizza. But I live in a 90% Hispanic neighborhood and 35% are immigrant or born somewhere else. And this is a beautiful neighborhood with wonderful diversity. And I genuinely believe that there's magic here and fascinating stories. And not just the current people that live here. What's fascinating about Chicago is that there's always been, it's a constantly living, breathing, changing, morphing thing. My neighborhood used to be German, Polish, Greek. Then the Puerto Ricans came in, then Mexicans. And so it's such a very cool, interesting place, and I love it like a person. So.
Well, it's my turn, I guess, right? So
Yes.
Italy is not such a little place. It's an old place. And my book has Italy and New York in it. And my family, that is my parents, were both Italian. I was born here. And 2 decades ago, I was the Associated Press Dow Jones bureau chief for Italy, and I kept reading in the Italian papers about this thing called a ustica strage. And strage means massacre. So now this was already 15 years after the plane went down in 1980. Yet it was still front page news, and the Italians called it strage because they knew it was foul play. A plane and 81 people went down without a mayday, and very quickly. So this was of great interest to me, both as a journalist, but also culturally and politically, and I'll get to that in a second. The Italian government never found out why, and seemed to be dragging its feet. This intrigued me as well. It took them 11 years to bring the plane up, even though they knew exactly where it was in the seabed floor. No group took responsibility, even though Italy was racked by terrorism in those days. You probably don't remember that. It was a different country then. And not until a few years ago, 2015, I think, did an Italian court even rule there had been an explosion on the plane, yet it could not determine whether it was from the inside and the outside. So as I read accounts and books on it, it turns out there were American, French, and Libyan jet fighters in the same area. What a surprise. Some said that Muammar Gaddafi was in his plane nearby, so perhaps somebody took a shot at him and missed him, but hit the commercial airline on its way to Palermo from Bologna. Now, what I just said is supposition from the counts. The only fact is this plane went down for seemingly no reason, and this really, really intrigued me. And by the way, a Libyan jet fighter and a dead pilot was found in the hills of Sicily 2 weeks after the plane went down, and the jet and the pilot were returned by the Italian government to Libya without an investigation. So the thing intrigued me the most is the Italian government didn't seem to be interested in finding out what happened. They're probably protecting someone. So I decided to give it a try. And what I wrote is total fiction. The only fact is this plane went down and nobody knows why even now, and they're still trying to hide it, in my opinion.
Well, I think it's fascinating that all three of you really have taken either a place or an incident that has touched all of you, whether for Cynthia, it's Chicago, or I know, Josh, you can talk about, if you're willing, what happened with your son, Dylan, that kind of inspired the book. And Vito, what really stuck with you about this story and the questions and made it into something that was larger and really told a larger, and bigger story. That's beyond, just a small crime novel. Josh, if you wanted to start.
Yeah. This novel started 10 plus longer years ago. My son is intellectually disabled, and at 26, he was struck with schizophrenia. And up until then, he'd been this great guy, and then he would have rages, and he'd tear things up. And we made the mistake of calling the LAPD because we didn't know how to get him to a hospital. He was tearing things up. And I've said it's the worst mistake I ever made, because 911 got a cop showing up at our door he kept plucking his chest and yelling at my son to comply. And when you're intellectually disabled and Dylan doesn't know he's never learned that authority, you're supposed to kowtow to them. And the guy's plucking his badge. Do you know what this means? And my wife said to the cop, he doesn't. And he just pushed her back and said, "We got this, ma'am." And his hand's near his gun. And that situation, we got lucky that some people from a SMART team came, which is a psychologist and a cop. And the psychologist talked Dylan down in about 5 minutes. It went from somebody getting shot to sitting on a couch talking about him. Does he want to take his pajamas off and put on some clothes before he goes to the hospital? Now, that stuck with me as an idea, as the centerpiece of a novel. And add into that, I knew that was going to be the beginning, and I took a whole long time to figure out how to write a police novel in today's world. People say, well, right now, why would you release a police novel? And I go, this stuff didn't happen this summer. We've had ugly stuff happening since the beginning of LA. But my grandfather was a cop also. So how do you write a cop story? So that was the genesis, and then it became this novel over years. But yeah, that's how it started.
Cynthia, do you want to go into?
It was interesting what Josh said. I had received I had seen similar commentary, like, how did you feel confident to write a police procedural in this day and age? Well, the story actually, the idea came about in 2009. So I've been slowly working at this idea for quite some time. And it was inspired about, my upbringing, essentially. I grew up and I still live in inner city Chicago. And I knew people who have lost their lives to gun violence. I know people who were in gangs. I think anything that you can talk about in terms of violence and what it's like to live in an inner city, I've likely encountered it. And on the other hand, I have family who are in law enforcement as well. So it's this strange position to be in, to hear both sides of the situation. And it's a complicated situation. There's a huge socioeconomic factors at play. And I wanted to be able to write about children and violence. And that's always been my fascination with children that turn to violence because they feel like there is nowhere else to turn to. And I was one of these kids. I was one of these angry inner city kids that felt hopeless and helpless. And I wanted to be able to create this very complex message where we're dealing with a lot of issues here in this city, issues of trust, issues of violence. And I wanted to be able to, I use supernatural devices in my novel, but essentially it's a treatise on Chicago history and how we've never come to terms with our history of violence, of displacement, and we're still seeing the effects of that. We have neighborhoods that have no grocery store nearby. I have shootings in my alley. I've had shootings in front of my house. And so they're getting younger, these kids. There was recently a 14-year-old arrested for attempted murder. And it's like, we are failing children, and it's a huge issue. And so I wanted to be able to, my story is an adaptation of the Pied Piper fairy tale. That's the supernatural element that I bring into play. And it's essentially, I wanted to create this mythos of someone luring children into violence that is above themselves. So. I think you're on mute.
I lost your sound, Chantel.
Always. Seriously. You think at this point in the pandemic that I would know how to unmute myself. I said really brilliant things right there. And now no one will ever know. Best things I've ever said. I was saying that all three of you really have, whether or not it's intentional, in some cases it is, you have books that deal with really strong and heavy issues. I mean, Josh deals with neurodiverse issues. He deals with gangs, as do you, Cynthia, and Vito deals with terrorism. So did you, playing off, Vito, what Josh and Cynthia just said, did you, really think about that? Because it's certainly not a quiet, easy issue to deal with on the page.
Rustica bothered me. It bothered me for many, many years. It still bothers me. And it bothers me because somebody somewhere knows what happened. And 81 people died, and nothing's been done. I'm quite sure, and this is still supposition, that the Italian government knows what happened. Whether it was an American fighter, a French fighter, or a Libyan fighter that shot it down, the government lied, and powerful people are covering up other powerful people. And this really, really bothered me. And so when we left Italy, which was 98, it just kept at me, and I wanted to write a novel, and that thing just stuck in my head. And I said, how do I write a novel about such a terrible incident? And I've read lots of crime novels, and I know the genre well. And I just sat down, and it all came out. And then my wonderful agent said, you ought to end it in such a way that we have another one. So I did. But a lot of the characters in the book are based on real personalities, both here and in Italy. The two investigators, the two detectives are fake, but the Barron is someone who actually lived in Italy, and I didn't know him, but I knew who he was. And Montone is somebody who lived in Italy. They're both dead now, and it was a very powerful person. And the mayor, of course, I think you could all recognize if you read the book, the mayor of New York, who it was. And I just felt like this terrible thing, which could have been solved was not solved. So it bothered me. It still bothers me.
Well, I think that kind of is at the center of everybody's stories here tonight, that there's something that, whether it's an issue, like I know Josh and I talk a lot about smart teams and how very few cities have them. And it's something that seems to be, it would go without saying and would do a lot of good. And yet, it just doesn't exist. And so I think that even though these are all three compelling stories, that there's something at the heart of it where it's, a deeper issue. And I know that, Cynthia, you've dealt with this a lot online recently, but I think that another thing that all three books have in common is, and I don't want to phrase this the way I'm going to phrase it, but a protagonist, Josh and I talked about this, we had a call last week, and we were saying how both of your books have, we'll say, unlikable protagonists, but Josh and I both went for Children of Chicago. We said, we don't understand why people are saying that, because we found your protagonist very relatable and not unlikable at all. But in that sort of larger, literary way, it is a protagonist that is not, let's say, it's not an easy protagonist. And I know for Josh, he has two basically protagonists. He's got, Niels Madsen, who is a detective. He's police. And and if you don't mind me going a little bit into, our editing process, Josh, when I got the book, I went, I don't really like police procedurals. I mean, it's really funny that I've got, several of you right now on a call that have police procedurals, but I went, and then I started reading it, and Niels Madsen was just this very typical, cliche police protagonist. And I went, there's got to be something that happens right away here that's going to be different. And it was very different. But Josh, you had to set it up with somebody who was all of those tropes, in order for us to realize, his journey. And I think that the same thing goes for Lauren Medina with you, Cynthia, because, I don't feel like she's somebody that's not really relatable. She's had to make choices to survive and had bad things happen to her. And had losses and made bad choices. And so to me, it's not really these unrelatable protagonists. And I know, Vito, you have, really, it's three protagonists in your book, some of whom are going through the hardships of their own, and grief of their own. But I wanted to know what went into writing these various protagonists, and I doubt that you chose them to be quote unquote unlikable when you wrote them, but why you chose to make them, let's just put it this way, not, not rainbows and puppies.
Oh my God.
Rainbows and
First
puppies,
off,
I love that.
That's Cynthia. I don't understand why people don't like that character or say that character's angry and not right. I love her. And I think in the world we live in today, I don't know any women that I respect that aren't a little bit angry. So I kind of get it. It's like I read it and go, yeah, got it.
And maybe I took it personally. I did take it personally because she's modeled a lot after me. So when people were like, I don't like her, and I'm like, that's me. Lauren Medina is modeled after really, it would probably be 50% me and 50% my cousin, who's, I shouldn't have said that, but she's a high-ranking law enforcement official, and her personality is pretty tough. And I think like I said, when I was talking about youth, we often talk about inner city youth. We don't realize what becomes of inner city youth when they grow up. They become, if they're lucky, they become me, and we're still hardened by everything that we've encountered. That doesn't make us necessarily soft. It varies. It's different situations for everyone. So just speaking for myself, but sometimes we have to be cold. Sometimes we have to be detached because of everything that we've encountered. I have literally seen young men on the street with bullet holes in their back. I have friends that were, one friend that was paralyzed the week before high school graduation. I have a friend that went off to college and became this beautiful football star. And he came, and it was like this awful, typical story. He came to visit home and he was shot and killed. So something happens to you when you see that violence over and over again. And you have to be grounded in a way to protect yourself. And I think that's why I wanted to write Lauren from that perspective. When I feel cold and I feel detached and I have to protect myself, this is the place that I'm in. So she was easy to write for me because that I am her and I am that in a way. And the dialogue is the way we talk in Chicago. And so I was really surprised when some people didn't like her. And I think it's probably, my personal belief is probably many people haven't met a Puerto Rican woman that has lived and been, raised in inner city Chicago. And that could be one of the main reasons. I live in the West Side. There aren't many writers from the West Side of Chicago, let alone Puerto Rican women. So it could be this shock to see that there's a woman that's very pointed and she doesn't ask. She says, this is what I need to have now. And we don't take no for an answer. If I didn't take no for an answer, I wouldn't be alive today. And that's how Lauren has survived, and the same way I've survived.
Well, I have to say about the two main characters in my book, Paul Rossi is not based on me, although we share one characteristic, and that is cynicism. But I mean that in the ancient Greek sense, and in the sense that show me, you know what I mean? I want to know what is right, but you have to show what's right. You can't just believe everything you read. And so Paul is a guy with a lot of problems, and cops have lots of problems. You have to respect that. You have to know that. I mean, they drink, they see really bad stuff, they engage in bad stuff, some of them. So Paul was like that. And Hamilton, I said to myself, well, I need somebody who's a foil, someone who's different from Paul. Otherwise, it would just be boring to have two cynical cops. And Hamilton is very optimistic. He wants to be the mayor. He's a former lawyer. He wants to do good. He still believes in doing good. And I liked that combination of two main characters. I thought that would work. Some people like it, some people don't. If you look on the Amazon reviews, it seems like Hamilton is actually the more popular character. But
well, another thing that all three of your books have in common, which I actually find, I think this is a really great, it's not really a pairing, but threesome for this, because there are, even though there are three very disparate books, there are these overlapping commonalities. And the other thing, as much as, for example, Chicago or Los Angeles are cities and protagonists in your book, there's also this really interesting and deep concept of family. Josh, Niels Madsen, has family that he's dealing with. Lauren, has just lost her father and is dealing with that issue. And Vito, Lieutenant Monroe, has her sister. And these things, these people who really are absent or about to be absent, but family plays a really strong role in all three books.
Yeah, I mean,
there's
Paul
a question
Rossi,
there somewhere.
Paul Rossi's family is important. His grandfather taught him how to speak Italian because he was raised by his grandfather because both of his parents were working. And yes, Murrow came over, although I'm not going to give any spoilers. She came over to collect the body of her brother, and there is lots about their family and what was going on in Italy during what was called Gli anni di piombo, which means the years of lead. It's very interesting because people don't realize how bad it got in Italy in the 60s and the 70s. I mean, a former prime minister was abducted and killed and stuffed in a trunk. That would be like if Clinton were abducted and killed. I mean, it was terrible, those 2 decades, and bad things were happening all the time. And the Italian government has always been quite weak. So the only thing you had was family, basically.
It's in Tricky, it is not just about Madsen. When writing Madsen, I wanted to write a good cop. My grandfather was a good cop. We never even knew he had a gun because he never pulled it, and he had made it all the way to chief of corrections. He was a good man who didn't believe you should hurt other people. He was that kind of a guy. So I wanted to write that, but then you go, okay, now he's kind of boring. I go, what if instead of the internal turmoil, he was just a cop in that world, so he's got some fucked up ideas, but they weren't bad. But what's more important is he's got the grandfather who he has and he's taken care of is getting more and more senile and forgetting things. And he's dealing with a caregiver who's almost as old as his grandfather, and start to put pressures from his life in there. But the other family part of it is Cisco, the young man accused of murder, has a whole family and has a whole gang family and has this whole world that is also his family shows up in it. Because I don't want... There's a whole thing whether he did or didn't do it. Is he faking it or is he actually disabled? And we don't know. I have dogs walking around behind me. But what I wanted to see was that doesn't have a family. Everybody has a family. Everybody has people who love them. His cousin who runs the gang he was in loves him, and they carry a bunch of weird baggage back and forth, because that's a world that I've known a lot of people in and have come up in. And I don't... When I see people who are cardboard villains or cardboard gangsters or cardboard whatever, I go, those aren't the people I knew. That isn't who I grew up with. Yeah. I've done some criminal things in my past. It has led me to know some people I probably shouldn't. But thankfully, they're all out there, and some of them are willing to read the book and give me notes and go, oh, man, you got this part right, this part. Nobody says that. And if you're talking Mexican gangs, we don't talk that. We get that out of there. Oh, you have the cards. You say that. That's like a hot rod thing. That's not a low rider thing. Well, that kind of stuff is what having those people to call on is the way I can make sure that it's working. But yeah, they're all family in it. My dogs are not family. They're kicked out.
With Lauren, she lost her mother, and her father was the only person she had left. So I think for that character, she was always seeking validation that I am good enough, validation that I made you proud, validation. And I'm Puerto Rican, and I could do anything in my, no matter what I did, it was never good enough for my parents. It was like, great, you got a college degree. Now what? And it was always like, you guys have a 6th grade education. I have a college degree. And so I kind of wanted to speak to that because, even my husband's Mexican. And so we would always kind of comment on that, like, no matter what we do in our families, it's like, it's not good enough. And so I think with Lauren, it was seeking this validation that I am good enough. I am making you proud. And so when she lost her father, I think not only did she lose her mother, she lost her father, who never really validated her value. That contributed. I think that probably fractured her in a way that was irreparable at that point.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting because, all of these, and like I said, when I was asking the last question, it's police procedural was never really a genre that I read or was attracted to. And in all 3 of these cases, they're books that just really set apart from, everything. And I think that it's really interesting that everybody has, I don't want to say a larger question that they want to answer, but for lack of a better word, that they're answering through this I did very, kind of stoic and rule-based medium. So that's kind of, I think the next question is, why did everybody choose at least one protagonist that was, constrained in these ways by rules?
I wrote too many books about criminals. I mean, that's partly true. Part of it was that, part of it was after all the reading and research and thinking, I spent several years just thinking about police and the militarization of police and how do we get here, and reading about it and talking to cops and talking to crooks. And I think it's a discussion we need to be having. I think that I've told you this, that I write with this idea. The reason I write fiction is a way to tell the truth and the way to bury Trojan horses. I put little armies inside these stories that hopefully nobody notices until they end the book and go, well, that's kind of effed up. So this kid, when he was 14, was tried as an adult and put into an adult prison, which they did back then in California. So those kind of ideas are just little ideas in it, but it's a bigger way to start this conversation. I think we need to be talking about the police. I think the idea, I've talked to people who say, well, you must hate the police. No, I just think we need to really rethink how we did it. I'm going to digress for half a second. My grandfather spent his life trying to make the prisons better. And right before he died, 2 weeks before he died, I said, Grandpa, with everything's happened to the prisons, and he went against the system and brought in psychologists when you weren't supposed to and brought AA into the prisons. I said, with everything that's happened in the world, what would you do to prisons today? He said, Joshua, I would tear them to the ground. We got the idea wrong. We need to start over. And so a lot of this is trying to have that discussion, like, how do we start over? If we aren't talking about the police, we won't change it. We need to all be figuring that out. And I think putting it in books is a good idea. It just, as long as they aren't, the lone hero running out there alone and he breaks all the laws, but he solves the crime. I hate that cop. That's so the sort of Clint Eastwood cop and Dirty Harry that I grew up on right now is the ugly cop who would be killing people. And we go, I don't want that, but we have to be talking about it for us to get anywhere. That's for me.
I always knew it had to be a detective novel. And I've always been fascinated with Poe, who created the detective, and then Voorhees, who kind of took the detective and made it even more complex and cerebral. And so I wanted to write a detective novel where the detective's trying to solve a mystery, but ultimately the mystery cannot be solved. We just cannot solve this problem. And so I wanted to do that. And I think that's also a huge frustration for readers. They're like, it doesn't end. And I'm like, ta-da, life doesn't, I'm still living here in this city. We haven't solved these problems. And I can't put a Band-Aid on this book because there is no Band-Aid in the city right now. So I think that was huge frustration for readers that it's an unsolvable problem right now that I hope maybe in my lifetime we can solve.
I like what Josh said about fiction as a way to tell the truth. And what Cynthia said about, things being unsolvable, because I think my novel too is kind of a downer. It's unsolvable in the sense that it was solved and unsolved and not solved. We know what happened, but nobody did anything about it. And those are the limits and constraints that you talk about that we work under, unfortunately. And whether we're talking about, police brutality, or whether we're talking about income inequality or brutality, we're trying to portray our version of the truth in fiction. I will never presume to be right about what happened because I want to honor the 81 people that died. They have relatives and sons and daughters that are still alive in Italy today. And we just don't know what happened. And frankly, I'm afraid we'll never know.
I think that's another commonality that all three of you have, is that you've got, for lack of better words, victims that, whether or not it's a true event like Vito is writing about, or just placeholders, Josh, for your son, Dylan, even, or Cynthia, for the people that you see, who are shot down every day. There's this level of it being true, and you're honoring victims by what you're writing. And I think that's wonderful.
I hope so. I hope so. I sometimes, wonder about that maybe people in Italy, we'll see if it ever gets published in Italy, if people in Italy will actually take to it or not. You know what I mean? With this, like, who's this American writing about our most terrible tragedy? I mean, if you say to an Italian of a certain age, Ustica, that's all you got to say. It's like saying a grassy knoll to an American. They know exactly what you're talking about.
And it's pain. I think we've taken, in each of our stories, have just taken these years of accumulated pain, and the novels themselves are painful. And so I hope it comes across what we're trying to tell people about these things that are very important, and that people are affected by it still.
Yeah, no, these are all things that, people are experiencing day by day. I know like Josh and I talk all the time about, spreading awareness for these smart teams. Like that's just, it seems these are all things that are solvable, whether it's, police crises or
it's
something
funny you
else.
say that. It's funny you say that, Chantel. I have to interject one thing. You remember last year when that Iranian airliner went down? When Trump killed Soleimani, and then the Iranians shot down their own plane by accident. I mean, it happens over and over and over again. You know what I mean? It's just government power.
Hey, it's one of the reasons why we have to humanize this stuff is that watching the news, you can get numb. Another plane down. And unless we humanize the people in that plane, unless you humanize the kids in your horror story, which is also Chicago, unless we humanize disabled adults, people go, oh, that happens. Yeah, somebody else got shot. Yep. And unless it's on video, they don't really know. So Tricky's not as painful as other things I've written. To be honest, I've written stuff. I wrote about the sex trade for a while, and it hurt me so bad. By the end, I said, I've got to stop. I got to stop writing about. I was too angry. It's not as angry as I've been. It's a kinder, gentler me because it's about. Yes, there's a bunch of stuff in there I want to talk about, but it's also a way to write about my son, who I adore, and the humor and the humanism. What is human about somebody who's intellectually disabled? All the things in there that isn't the magic. Oh, he's not wise. No, he's just a guy. But he's funny as hell. And so for me, that was part of it. That's part of the hat trick was to go, this is going to be a detective story. It's going to be exciting. It's going to have thrills. You won't know who isn't, but you'll also learn to look at people differently. You'll see someone like Dylan, my son, and go, oh, maybe he's like Cisco, which he is.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful, and that's really at the core of all three of your books, and that's why I thought that the three of you would make such a wonderful team talking today, because there's so much more than meets the eye about all three of these books. So McKenna told me that we should aim for about 45 minutes, and I'm waiting to see if we have any questions come up. But before that, why doesn't everyone tell me what's up next or next release or what they're working on?
Well,
anybody?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
All three of you at the same time. Okay.
I am trying to finish. I'm working. Well, I'm working on the next in the Chicago saga. This one is going to deal. It's going to be another genre blending novel, and it's going to deal with a lot of issues of gentrification and displacement. So, but it's again going to deal with fairy tale elements of sorts and another supernatural figure.
I'm in the middle of writing a big book I don't really want to talk about till I get it figured out. And trying to get the word out, writing essays and trying to get the word out about how to deal with psychologists and police and how to rethink about how we look at policing in America. So I've been writing about that and trying to, that's just my now mission is to convince people to talk about that shit. And when they say defund the police, you can't say that. I go, I would defund the whole police tomorrow. And I'd say, come back and we'll see if we can get you your job back. But that's how I would handle it. Because I think we need to break it down to the bottom and rebuild the thing from the bottom up. And there's so many ways to do it cheaper than we're doing it. It isn't a money thing. It isn't this thing. We need tanks taken out of police forces. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So that's kind of where my head is right now.
And Josh,
Revolution.
Quickly, as a mother of 2 children on the autism spectrum, thank you for writing this book. It was important because it happens.
We do need to talk about that because they are at risk.
Yeah, they are.
More so, and that sucks.
I guess
Vito,
it's my
what's
turn.
next for you? Yeah.
So I'm supposed to be writing, and I am writing the second installment, but I've only gotten a little bit done of it, of The Man in Milan. And I have the idea, and I have it mapped out. I just got to write it. The other thing is I actually have another novel that's not a crime novel that is also set in Italy. I guess there's a theme there, right? It's set in World War II about a soldier who tries to escape from the Germans and the Nazis and the Allies because, again, this is Italian history and nobody knows about it. But Italy changed side in the middle of the war, and it just made anyone in the army, the Italian army, a target. The Germans were targeting them. The Americans were targeting them. So the main character is trying to escape both sides and stay alive. So.
Well, that all sounds wonderful. And McKenna tells me we have at least one question from the audience, but I do not know what it is. So welcome back, McKenna.
Hi. So watching you guys, that was wonderful and such a great talk. It reminds me of a couple things. One, I'm going to give everyone a chance to do an elevator pitch, or at least a very short. John makes the statement that you can stop at a couple floors if you'd like on the elevator, but a short synopsis of your book, because we just had like a super in-depth conversation, but I want people to know what the actual plot on the books are. So also the other thing that it made me realize is why I'm so anal retentive about calling on people, because everyone just sits and waits for someone else to speak up. So we're going to start with Cynthia. Tell me about your book.
My book, Children of Chicago, is a modern day homage to the fairy tale set in Chicago as a police procedural where a detective is investigating a series of teen murders.
Great. Okay, Josh, your turn. Tricky.
Tricky it's the story of a young my brain just went. Cisco is a young man who, when we first see him, police have guns drawn on him, and he has a gun, and there's a dead kid in front of him, and he has a lot of scars. And our protagonist, Nels Madsen, pulls up and actually convinces them not to shoot him because he sees what's going to happen and gets him out of there. But you're pretty sure that Cisco did shoot this young man. He has a gun. He's standing over a dead body until it starts to unravel, and you discover he's intellectually disabled. Anybody who knows from a beating, and anybody who knows him after the beating says he never could have done it. And everybody on the police force says he did do it. He's just brilliant. And so it really is a question of A, are we changeable as humans? And B, did he change, or is he brilliant? And that's sort of the here and there. And it's a LA novel.
Excellent. Okay, Vito, you're up.
Well, I'm going to impress you if you think I've got this memorized, but I'm just going to read from the book flap. I hope you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
When NYPD detectives Paul Rossi and Hamilton P. Turner began investigating the Sutton Place murder of an Italian Air Force pilot, the last thing they expect, they will find themselves sucked into a potential cover-up of the Ustica massacre, the most horrific aviation crime in Italian history, in which 81 souls perished. But as they begin investigating, Rossi, recovering from a broken marriage, Turner, an African-American opera buff poet and former lawyer with ambitions to be mayor, come up against New York NYPD bureaucratic obstacles and stonewalling by the Italian consulate in New York. Lieutenant Lara Muro, the policewoman sister of the victim, comes to New York to aid the investigation, but soon the trio find themselves in the crosshair of Gladio, Italy's powerful, shadowy political cabal, whose reach extends even to the highest reaches of New York and New York political and ruling class. Gladio exists, by the way. It's a real cabal from the 60s where, again, with the Italian history, I don't want to bore everybody, but the communists were very close to taking power, and so Gladio was kind of a monarchist military cabal, and it had lists of people that they were going to line up and shoot if the communists won a legal election.
Wow. Okay. So we also have, as I mentioned earlier, we have some other Agora Polis events coming up. We have next month, I believe, if I'm getting it right, because there was a lot of scheduling, is Zana Schlor and who am I missing, Chantal?
Okay, I should know this.
Okay, well, this is a failed attempt at a segue to say that we have a fun question from next month's author. My question is, what is Vito drinking in that mug, and is it whiskey?
No, it's coffee. It's just coffee, and the other one is water.
All right. Well, we are looking forward to the talk with Zana next month for her new book. You want to you want to give a little bit about that, Chantel, since it's coming?
Oh, sure. So her debut book comes out on April 20th, and it's called At the End of the World, Turn Left. And, it's interesting and actually a really good segue, because we talked about family and the issues that all of your protagonists dealt with family today. And that's really at the core of Zana's book, because it tells the story of two sisters who came, one as basically an infant and one just a little bit older, from what was the USSR, but now is basically the Ukraine. And they emigrated to Wisconsin with their family, and how various generations, because we see her grandparents, we see her parents, and then we see these two sisters and how they define home. And when the younger sister is contacted online by a woman who claims to be a third related sister that they didn't know about, and then the younger sister disappears, the elder sister comes back from Israel, where she has emigrated, to help search for her. And so they all kind of, in their own ways, are searching for how they define home and family.
Great job. And it sounds so good. I need to read it before the event. It's on my list. So we do have another question from Shane, who says it's not an important question, but I'm going to pop it up here anyway. He was wondering if any of the three authors has read Radley Balco's Rise of the Warrior Cop. Obviously pertinent to the conversation. Yes. You have, Josh?
I have not.
I did, and it's a really good look at how we got where we are with the military, policing, and all of that, how we got. It just lays that out nicely. One of the things that becomes clear in that book is that it doesn't matter who's in the White House. We have, since Richard Nixon, have started the war against drugs, and the way that turned into money was there's money for tanks, there's money for military weapons, there's no money for training. You can get the federal government to come in.
Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, but the military is constantly giving the police equipment, right?
Well, they're giving in quotes, yeah.
And I mean, it's not police equipment; it's military equipment.
No, it's military police. And on Martha's Vineyard, a tiny little island off in Massachusetts, one of the police force there has a tank. Why the fuck do they have a tank? I don't know.
Well, we also have a fence around the Capitol now, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, but that book is awesome. I'm glad he brought it up. It is a good book for an overview of how we got where we are today. And we shouldn't use tanks against our people.
Yeah.
And I looked up McKenna just so that I can actually be informative here. April 19th at 7 p.m. It's Zana Slore, who we discussed, and Johnny Shaw, who has written The Southland, and also Joe Clifford. So that's who's coming up. You did the same. Okay.
I was like, I'm going to have this ready too. Yeah. And then we're going to be back in May with
Sung Woo,
there you go,
who's Skin Deep, and Andrea J. Johnson, and both of them have, they're a little bit, I don't want to say there are definitely cultural issues going on there, but unlike today's rather heavy discussion, those two are a little bit more lighter PI type romps.
Yep, and that's why we have them paired. And then actually it's not an official Agora Polis night, but we also have Gary Phillips in conversation with Kent Harrington in April. So you guys are going to be all over our Facebook and YouTube. But on that note, thank you all so much for taking the time tonight and joining us. Chantel, you did a great job. Thank you for leading the discussion.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Really, thank you for having us all. I'm just proud to have three amazing authors to talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You should be. Okay, so I'm going to sign us all off. As I said earlier, there are links. There are several people who've said that they've made lists off of this talk, and I know where you can find the books. There's a link right there. So everyone have a great night, and thank you again so much. Bye.
Yeah,
thank you. Bye, everybody. Bye.